I recently watched an interview with journalist Alison Boshoff about the ongoing Beckham family feud, but there was one very short comment she made, and that is the inspiration for this video. She was asked whether there was any way back for Brooklyn and Nicola and the Beckhams, whether reconciliation was still possible. And Alison's answer was this.
Are Brooklyn and Nicola any closer to being reconciled with the Beckhams?
No, and I'm told, on the contrary, Nicola is over it now. I don't think she has no interest.
Nicola is over it, so that's all that matters. But what about Brooklyn? Because whatever you think about this feud, these aren't Nicola's parents. They're Brooklyn's. These aren't Nicola's siblings. They are Brooklyn's. And yet somehow whether Nicola is willing to move forward appears to be the determining factor, or at least enormously important in determining whether Brooklyn ever has a relationship with his family again. And actually, that comment reinforced something I had already begun to suspect long ago about Alison's reporting. I believe she is far closer to sources on Brooklyn and Nicola's side than she is to the Beckhams. And I think that inevitably colours her coverage. Now that's my interpretation. And I'm getting it from some of the comments she's made throughout her whole media tour to promote this book.
The key to the whole falling out, of course, is they don't like the woman who he chose to marry.
That may be the case, but it's still hard to imagine how any child would be so desperate to publicly slam their parents.
I think when you understand where it's come from, this is a kid who feels he's been exploited by the people who should actually be instead nurturing him, the people in the world he should trust the most.
I'm not suggesting I know who she speaks to privately. This is simply my opinion, my interpretation, but she herself, throughout many podcasts and interviews, talks about having very good sources close to Brooklyn and Nicola, and sometimes there seems to be a slip of the tongue where she can confidently say something that she could only know if Brooklyn and Nicola were direct sources, I believe. All the while joking that she's probably off David and Victoria's Christmas card list.
I may be off the Christmas card list, Camilla.
I've noticed something similar in her reporting on Harry and Meghan.
I caused a huge sensation when I wrote about Prince Harry and Meghan's visit to the UK. This is how I did it and what happened next. I'm Alison Boshoff, the editor-at-large of the Daily Mail, and I wrote a story recently with the headline, Harry's New Megxit Deal, where I detailed the terms and strategy of Harry and Meghan's forthcoming visit to the UK. I think now there is a shift. I think that it's a focus for Prince Harry to spend some more time in the UK. Some people think that he's even considering sending Archie to school here. Certainly he seems to be taking up the threads of some friendships which had been left to fade away a bit. And he also has some really key to him charity work in the UK. Now Centre Barley he's no longer involved in. Invictus is really his main charitable focus, and charity is the main focus of his life. So it's quite natural that there would be some more focus on coming back to the UK.
My impression has long been that when it comes to these warring families, and when I say warring families, it's basically the wives that have married into the family going scorched earth. That's my opinion. Alison has maintained better lines of communication with the Sussex side than with the royal side. And to be fair to her, that is part of journalism. Sources matter. And when two sides are at war, keeping everybody equally happy is probably impossible. And it's my opinion that Alison has chosen Harry and Meghan's side, and she has chosen Brooklyn and Nicola's. And that's fine, she can do that. But there is going to be pushback, and this video is about a pushback to some of the arguments she made in a recent podcast. I do think the results of her reporting shows enormous bias. A few weeks ago, for example, I read an extraordinarily flattering Daily Mail article about specifically Nicola Peltz. You would have thought Nicola Peltz wrote this article herself. It was so sweet. And at the time, I hadn't even noticed who had written it. I remember getting halfway through and thinking, who on earth wrote this? And so I checked, because it was so relentlessly positive. And so I scrolled back to check the byline. And sure enough, it was Alison Boshoff. There were these strangely complimentary little details throughout. And I'm paraphrasing here because I don't have the article in front of me, but there was even a description of Nicola's brother giving a speech at the wedding, and the way it was written was so sickly sweet. Everybody was applauding in agreement. It was one of the lines. It's just, people don't speak like this. And if this is the quality of the journalism, there's a reason I don't pay for these articles behind a paywall. I just remember thinking, this reads at minimum like someone has been given a version of events in which even the most ordinary details were presented in the most favorable possible light. It reminded me of reading People magazine and articles about Meghan Markle. Just absolutely sickly sweet with sentences real people don't say. Now, none of this means Alison is a bad journalist. I have absolutely nothing against her. She has her free will, I have mine, and you have yours. She probably has well-placed sources, and that is quite literally her job. But it does mean that when someone who appears to have excellent access to one side of a family feud, when she casually says, Nicola is over it, I pay attention, because those 4 words reveal so much. And perhaps that tells us considerably more than Alison ever intended to. And it immediately made me think of Harry and Meghan. Not only because I personally believe Alison is quite favourable to both of these couples, it's her prerogative. In both cases, we have a husband who has demonstrated extraordinary loyalty to his wife, to the point that his relationships with his own family have suffered enormously. And perhaps you believe they were right to do that. Maybe you believe a husband should ultimately choose his wife. I'm not necessarily going to argue with you. I have my own opinions about taking the side of your spouse. It really depends on A, if your spouse is being honest.
I've never looked up my husband online. 3 days before our wedding, we got married. No one knows that. The vows that we have framed in our room are just the 2 of us in our backyard with the Archbishop of Canterbury.
And B, if your spouse is causing problems, or at least partly to blame in the family dynamic. But my predominant question is what happens afterwards? If your husband is prepared to sacrifice relationships he has had since birth in order to stand beside you, what are you prepared to sacrifice for him? That's the question I would ask Nicola and Meghan. Even if you dislike his family, and even if you believe they've treated you badly, is there a point where supporting your husband means doing something you don't particularly want to do? Surely there must be a point where you say, okay, I'm over it, but he's not. I can see he's suffering. He's cut ties with everyone for me. These people still matter to him. He matters to these people. And if reconciliation would be good for the person I love, perhaps I need to meet him halfway. Because regardless of what Oprah Winfrey is going to tell you in some special, estrangement is an extremely serious thing. Now, sometimes it is absolutely necessary. There are families and circumstances where walking away really is the healthiest or safest option. But permanent estrangement from an entire family shouldn't automatically be treated as a healthy or desirable outcome simply because your wife doesn't like them or because relationships have become difficult.
Quickly, did you make Kate cry?
No.
Or somebody has been hurt, whatever the reason is. And increasingly, I think we're living in a culture that is aided by people like Oprah Winfrey, my opinion, that is very comfortable telling people how to cut off others.
Best-selling author of Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. And I hear it has sold now over 2 million copies, and many people credit your book as the catalyst, actually, for this surge in adult children going no contact.
And considerably less interested in asking what it might take to bring people back together, which is also why later in this video, I will briefly talk about Oprah Winfrey and some of the messaging around family estrangement. This is a woman who very much put herself first, and that's fine. But don't send messages incorrectly to people who are actually involved in dynamics you are not. But anyway, I will get to that later because I think it fits into a much bigger cultural conversation about boundaries and forgiveness. And I think actually Oprah and Meghan are very similar. And I will explain what I mean when we come to it. But primarily, we're going to look at 2 marriages, Brooklyn and Nicola, and Harry and Meghan. Because perhaps the real question isn't whether a husband should stand by his wife, Perhaps it's what standing by your husband looks like after he's already given up so much to stand by you. There was another moment in Alison's interview that really caught my attention because she discussed Brooklyn's now infamous Instagram statement, the one where he essentially aired dirty laundry on a public platform asking for privacy while allegedly setting up pap shots of his girlfriend and himself. But anyway, I digress. He obviously laid out a series of allegations against his parents. And even when Alison is telling the story, there are certain things she says where it's clear the Beckhams were right in what they were doing, but she says it in a way that dismisses it or bypasses it quickly. Her focus, to me, in my opinion, seems to be very, very much on how victimized Nicola feels. Alison acknowledges something that I think most people suspected immediately. Brooklyn didn't write that statement entirely by himself. It doesn't take a genius to work out someone helped him write this Instagram post, the one where he went scorched earth.
I think it gets time to get used to it. Obviously it's not the best thing to see people writing, not the nicest of things.
And who do you think helped him with this? Now, Alison's response is that essentially, so what? Why shouldn't his wife be involved? Because the person interviewing her, I think her name's Camilla, she kind of not pulls her up, but she goes, well, is that a good idea? And then eventually they start speaking about why wouldn't a wife be involved in something like that? And fine, fair enough. Husbands and wives, of course you're a team. You're a team with your partner. You do things together. Now, when I talk about being partners and doing things together, I don't really refer to writing an Instagram post in which you say horrible things and attack your family. I was thinking more like doing the shopping together, sharing the chores around the house. Or I don't know, maybe if you did get into an issue where you needed to write a letter to someone, be it a lawyer or a judge, yes, they may help you.
God bless Brooklyn. I think he's written it and then not quite understood how it was going to be interpreted.
Has he written it?
Well, or has he? Yes, that's another bit in the book where somebody in their camp did admit to me that is not all his own homework.
It didn't sound like it was all his own.
But why shouldn't a wife actually have a say? You know, that's the other thing. I think there is a lot of genuinely unpleasant sexism and undeserved hatred towards Nicola and Brooklyn, and ditto actually Harry and Meghan and that kind of. Why can't a woman have a say? Why can't you stick up for your marriage?
Of course, your husband or wife can help you write something. This is not a gender issue. But if Victoria Beckham helped David compose a statement about her family, I would make exactly the same argument I'm about to make about Nicola. The problem isn't that Nicola helped her husband write something. Brooklyn probably needed it. The problem is what they were writing. Anyone who read that statement could probably understand why people immediately questioned whether Brooklyn had written it alone. Rightly or wrongly, Brooklyn has developed a reputation over the years for not exactly being the most gifted communicator. And suddenly we see this long, carefully constructed statement containing language and expressions that didn't necessarily sound like the way we've heard Brooklyn speak before. There were noticeable Americanisms coming from a very noticeably British man. But forget the speculation, because Alison herself says Nicola was involved. And this is where I fundamentally disagree with the idea that her involvement is irrelevant. There is a difference between supporting your husband privately during a family dispute and helping him construct a public statement attacking his parents that they knew would be damning. Because once you do the second one, you've entered the feud yourself. And more importantly, you have potentially made reconciliation considerably harder. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that Nicola's version of events is completely correct. Let's say she felt unwelcome. Let's say she believed David and Victoria never really warmed to her. Let's even say she had every reason to dislike her in-laws. Okay, so let's go with all of that for the sake of argument, even though that's not what I personally believe based on evidence. She's still an adult with choices. She still has a brain in her head and she should use it because her father has publicly spoken out about the value of privacy and, in my opinion, kind of taking a dig at the Beckhams. So maybe his own daughter should take that advice and stop walking around where paparazzi just seem to be on a beach and in a gated community. Maybe stop doing all these photo shoots if you want your privacy. Maybe don't help your husband write such a grievous and attacking sentiment and publish it for millions of people to read. But I digress.
My advice is stay the hell out of the press. I mean, so how much good did that do? But, you know, That my daughter and the Beckhams are a whole other story, but I'll tell you, my daughter is great.
So going back to her, let's just give her the benefit of the doubt. One choice is, I don't like these people. I don't like my in-laws. They don't like me. I'm going to keep my distance. I'm going to support my husband privately and get on with my life. Okay, that's choice number one. Another is helping your husband publicly air his grievances while you're both obviously very angry against his parents in front of millions of people, and then allegedly complain about the backlash. Those are not the same thing. And this is where I see a very obvious parallel with Harry and Meghan, because the Oprah interview is the Instagram post of Harry and Meghan. It was their version of crossing the line. Meghan was obviously a major participant in that interview. She was mostly the only one in that interview until Harry came out. And of course, he's equally wrong in doing it. But I'm just saying the majority of that interview was Meghan, and I wouldn't be surprised if the majority of that Instagram post was written by Nicola, because maybe David Beckham at one point said hurty words. Ultimately, Harry is responsible for what Harry chose to say about his own family. And I'm not taking that responsibility away from either Harry or Brooklyn. And in fact, in these situations, I think the worst players are Harry and Brooklyn, because you should be strong enough to tell somebody who's not from your family to know their place in the dynamics of your family. There are limits you have to put. With people, with children, with everyone. And if you don't, they may do things that Meghan and Nicola have done. When you stand for nothing, you fall for anything. But once a spouse becomes actively involved in publicly exposing, criticizing, or humiliating their partner's family, the dynamics change forever. I don't think you can come back from that. The Oprah interview, I don't think Meghan would ever be seen the same, neither by the public nor by the royal family. There are certain things in life you do where it changes how people perceive you. The same with Nicola. Alison's admission that essentially the assumption is that Nicola wrote, or at least helped write this Instagram post, means that there is no going back. You should have let your husband deal with this instead of getting involved. And if you feel your husband's too weak to do it, then you should just keep your distance from that side of the family. And most importantly, imagine reconciliation in the future, because you're not simply asking Brooklyn to forgive his mother for something she allegedly did. You're asking Victoria to sit across a table from a daughter-in-law who helped her son publicly denounce her. You're not simply asking Harry to repair things with William or Charles. Not that he really could at this point. You're asking those relationships to recover after deeply personal family grievances and lies were told in front of an international audience. That is why I don't buy the argument of simply saying, well, why shouldn't the wife get involved? She can, but to her own detriment. But getting involved has consequences. And strangely enough, some of the other things Alison says in this interview actually made me question Brooklyn and Nicola's version of events more, rather than less. One example involves Brooklyn's allegation that his parents pressured him over his name, his surname. The way Brooklyn presented it on Instagram was that they didn't want him to be a Beckham anymore, and he had to sign over his rights, and he couldn't be free. He was chained to the basement and Victoria was dancing on him. That's the way he essentially phrased his life with them. I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea. The way he presented everything was super sinister, if not a little sexual. And part of the larger allegation, specifically with the surname, was that his parents were trying to control him before the wedding. But Alison herself gives considerably more context to that story. According to her account, this was connected to a business arrangement. It was very normal. There was nothing sinister. It involved David and the Beckham name. And there was a question over whether Brooklyn would continue professionally, because Brooklyn was going to take Nicola's surname or something like that, allegedly, I should say. And the deal that David had set up would mean that the Beckhams had to be the Beckhams. They couldn't be the Peltz, or Brooklyn couldn't be Brooklyn Peltz, something like that. And so it was a very small thing that they had to sign, that for business purposes, he would be recognized as Brooklyn Beckham. Okay, that's what I've understood.
Right. So the Beckhams were not on the top table at the wedding, and it was a day when all the slights were picked over, and this was one of many.
Yes.
But so in the run-up to the wedding, there had been a falling out with Brooklyn over a slightly dull and abstruse agreement over the rights to the Beckham name, because David had sold 55% of DB Holding Ventures, to another company, Authentic Brands Group, and that meant that they had some rights over the Beckham name. So
Yes.
they needed to unentangle some of the protective copyright filings as they pertain to their adult children. Now,
And that would have been problematic if they did, as they did go on to do, double barrel themselves up. She's a Beckham Peltz or a Peltz Beckham.
Yes.
If you're going to do that, I suppose contractually, legally and otherwise, you've got to have some stipulations in place to kind of ring fence
you've
the
got to be
Beckham
clear.
name. You do
Who
get
owns
that.
the name? We
Got
all
it.
understand
Okay.
that. So the way it was explained to me, and I'm not a lawyer, is that this is what's called a live and let live agreement, what was proposed, and that it would allow Brooklyn to have his brand and David to have his brand, and everyone could just carry on. But that was not the advice given by the Peltz lawyers, who said that it wasn't in Brooklyn's interest to sign this thing. And so from February 2022, when he refused to sign it, till April 2022, when he got married, they weren't on speaking terms. So therefore, everything that went down at the wedding, which was quite a sort of a normal wedding where there's, disasters and last minutes and things happen and people will get a bit, fall out in some minor way. But that all fell with the force of a bomb because they were already not on good terms and they were already miscommunicating.
Alison herself, even when she's telling this, didn't seem to regard it as the enormous issue Brooklyn's statement made it sound like. But then she mentioned something else. According to Alison, lawyers connected to the Peltz were advising Brooklyn about the situation. And that interested me because we're talking about a period around the beginning of this marriage, before the marriage, when apparently lawyers are already becoming involved in a disagreement between Brooklyn and his parents. So think about that. Brooklyn is going to get married. They need to sort out how legally he will appear in certain things. And it sounds like Nicola got involved, got Brooklyn, the Peltz lawyers, and they advised him not to sign anything. Maybe that's the reason David and Victoria don't like Nicola, is from the beginning, she was putting things in the way that would clearly divide the situation. Now, it's ultimately up to Brooklyn what name he takes. That's completely his choice. But this is what I mean of the wife. Even before she's the wife, she seems to be getting involved in things that will cause issues. If you are marrying into a family, you need to be so careful about that kind of things because, of course, your in-laws might not see you favorably if they think, wow, why did she hire lawyers when this is just a family issue and we're just talking about it with our son? Think about it. If you have a son or a daughter and you have a business and you need to sort something out before they go off and get married, and then their partner brings in the lawyers, you would probably be a little bit surprised, considering they weren't that long together at this point. Now, there may be an entirely legitimate reason for bringing in the lawyers. I wasn't sitting in those meetings, but if we're trying to understand how relations between the Beckhams and the Peltz became so hostile, surely that has got to be a relevant piece. We hear endlessly about what David and Victoria allegedly did to upset Nicola. She looked at me like this. She did that. She danced on Brooklyn. She wore black to my wedding. Like, all of this was detailed in Alison Boshoff's article. And I still, even after having read such a biased piece, I still cannot see it from Nicola's point of view. There are elements where I can. Even Alison admits in the latest interview that what Brooklyn said on Instagram wasn't true. He said that Victoria ruined his first dance. Alison said no, they had their first dance hours before that.
And so it wasn't the first dance. Okay, the first dance was to something else some hours prior.
What Victoria is said to have ruined is the special guest, Mark Antony. When he came out, he basically called Victoria the most beautiful woman in the room, which, to be honest, I can see how maybe that's upsetting. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, like Kourtney Kardashian said, Kim, there's people dying.
I had my diamond earrings in and one of them came out.
Oh my God, all right, so you take this one out. Show me where. Just show
In
me
the
where.
ocean. I'm not gonna find a What's wrong with you guys? My diamond earring came off in the ocean and it's gone. Kim, there's people that are dying.
I just told you
Anyone
that.
would
It's
be
fine.
annoyed. I work really
know,
hard and
I know you do.
So when you put it into perspective, it's not the most serious thing, but of all the things that have happened, that is the only thing that seems to be a valid point. Maybe her feelings were hurt that she wasn't the most beautiful woman in the room. I mean, it's so vapid when you actually think about it. There's so many things in this life. These are the problems of billionaires. Mark Antony called you the most beautiful woman in the room when I'm the most beautiful woman in the room. It's just so, come on now. that seems to be another inconsistency in Brooklyn's post. So basically, Alison, in her attempt, in my opinion, to defend their point of view, essentially has outed a few things. But like I was saying, we hear endlessly, either through Alison or other reports or even through Brooklyn and Nicola themselves about how horrible David and Victoria are, even though we get numerous accounts from other celebrities, from staff, wait staff, servers, from cleaners, that they're a fantastic family. They are so nice. They've raised all their other children correctly. And not only that, Alison reveals, again, I don't know how she thinks this is a flex for Nicola and Brooklyn. For David's 50th birthday, they refused to come if Romeo brought his girlfriend, because years ago, Brooklyn thought he was on a date with her. She says they never dated. They were only friends. Brooklyn says or thinks they were dating, even though Alison reveals they maximum would have had one date. I mean, and this is a long time ago. It sounds outrageous. It sounds absolutely outrageous. And to be honest, I do believe the girlfriend of Romeo saying, we never dated. It wasn't a date. We were just friends. We were in the same class. It sounds like Brooklyn had a crush on this girl. They were hanging out after school and he just assumed they were on a date. And for her, this was just Brooklyn. That seems to be what it is. And then to call your parents and say, we won't go unless you disinvite her. Oh, anyone who tries to back you into a corner, you cannot succumb to what they're saying because it gives them the power.
So this really started to build in the spring prior when it was David's 50th birthday party, and one of their other children was dating someone who Brooklyn believed he'd dated. Now, the lady in question says, we never dated. Brooklyn thought it was a date. It thought it was a dating situation. Perhaps it was just a hookup. Anyway, but the situation transpired that Brooklyn and Nicola, who had been making nice with the cameras for a couple of years, but it had been really hard going, and they felt sure that the Beckhams didn't like Nicola. And against this background, Brooklyn and Nicola said, we want to come to this birthday party. We won't step through the door if this woman is there, who's my brother's girlfriend. Now, at that point, you can make an argument that actually the Beckhams could really have just said, okay, this is a tough one and we can't change your mind, but we really want all of our children there. That's more important than our other son's girlfriend.
And again, I just don't understand how this was meant to be a brownie point for them. They come out of this looking horrendous. If you analyze Alison Boshoff's interview with The Telegraph, it's not good for Brooklyn and Nicola, even though it's supposed to essentially promote them, in my opinion. And just coming back to the lawyers, I just think the fact that Nicola and the Peltz family, even before they were married, allegedly got Brooklyn lawyers, I think they could at least ask, is that why David and Victoria began to feel suspicious or defensive or uncomfortable? Could it be the legal team you assembled against his own family? I know this might seem like shock horror to Alison Boshoff, but there might actually be two sides to this story. And that's what I find throughout this whole interview, and others too, that's missing from Alison's interpretation. She will reveal a detail that, to me, significantly complicates Brooklyn and Nicola's narrative, and then almost brush straight past the implication of it. There's another irony here too, because Nicola's father has previously spoken about the importance of keeping family private matters. This was on E! News, this was on Entertainment Tonight, so it had obviously been sent out by the press and picked up, and purposely so. If you're a man who cares about his privacy, which I do believe he does, because he's gotten to where he is in life and extremely wealthy without being all over the press, but to release a statement about the importance of privacy and not putting things out publicly and having that picked up by the press, and you know it will be because you're talking about a very famous family, I think there's hypocrisy there. And I think talk to your daughter about it, because she seems to be the one ringing the paparazzi on herself. That's my opinion. And if you don't like your in-laws, you don't have to pretend that you do. You don't have to spend Christmas together. You don't have to become best friends. And if a relationship genuinely isn't working, sometimes distance is the sensible option, both with Harry and Meghan and Nicola and Brooklyn. They have the resources to just move away, live their lives, and not throw bombs at people around them. How's that for an idea? But distance and public destruction are two completely different things. You can't preach the virtues of keeping family matters behind closed doors, Mr. Peltz. while simultaneously putting the most damaging allegations about the family in front of millions of strangers. Even Brooklyn and Nicola also talked about, we just want privacy. We just want privacy, but we'll call the paparazzi to come take pictures of us in our gated estate. How did they get in? And that brings me back to the point of this entire video. If reconciliation is supposedly impossible because Nicola is over it, didn't you get the memo? As she is carrying around her little puppies and her bag, and she's falling out with everyone around her, according to reports. But we also have to acknowledge that Nicola wasn't simply a bystander watching her husband fall out with his family. It's always interesting when someone comes into a family and then suddenly the partner with whom they've started a relationship falls out with his family that he's maintained a great relationship with for decades. So maybe she had her own agenda. Sometimes I think people like Meghan and Nicola, again, my opinion, I think they know what they're doing. I think when people go scorched earth, it's because they want to burn bridges. They really don't like the person and they'll do anything to get their prize away from them. That's just my opinion, because any logical person would tell you, we're just going to keep our distance from your parents right now because I feel they don't like me. I don't really like them either, but I understand you love them and I don't want to do irreparable damage. So what we'll do is we'll just spend Christmas with my parents or whatever it may be. I'm giving examples. There are so many other options they had, even if they were in the right. But the fact that both of these couples have gone publicly, which we now know with, in my opinion, lies. Not all of them. I think Meghan and Harry lied way more than Nicola and Brooklyn. I think Brooklyn and Nicola twisted things. And I think Meghan and Harry, honestly, in my opinion, just lied. And they tried to leave under false pretenses. And I think with Nicola and Brooklyn, she was upset that Victoria and David saw who she really was. These are just my opinions. And I think she saw, okay, well, there's no changing your mind, so F you. And they wrote that statement together, allegedly. Because look, if you help your husband burn the bridge, I do think it's fair to ask whether you should also have some responsibility for helping him rebuild it. And the fact that Alison Boshoff said,
Nicola is over it now. I don't think she has no interest.
I think that speaks volumes to who Nicola is. And Brooklyn too. Plenty of other things Alison said in that interview that I could pick apart, but I am going to leave it here because we simply just don't have time. I think I'm running over time already. And before I finish, I want to make one thing really clear. Even if you have enormous sympathy for Nicola Peltz or Meghan Markle, I think in both cases the couples have chosen the wrong path when it comes to dealing with family conflict. That's just obvious. And I say the couples deliberately. Harry is responsible for his decisions. Brooklyn is responsible for Brooklyn's. They're grown men, and I'm not going to infantilize either of them by pretending their wives somehow forced them to publicly attack their families. But I do think there's something particularly dangerous about becoming the in-law who joins that attack. Blood relatives have, or can have, I should say, enormous fights and somehow find their way back to each other. Parents forgive children, brothers forgive sisters, sisters forgive brothers, blah, blah, blah. There can be a lifetime of shared history underneath all that anger. An in-law doesn't have that foundation. And if you publicly attack your husband's mother, father, or siblings, those people don't have 20 or 30 years of memories with you pulling them towards forgiveness. And suddenly, even if your husband eventually wants his family back, you created another relationship that also needs to be repaired. And that is why I think the scorched earth approach to family conflict is so incredibly short-sighted. And what happens when children eventually become part of the equation? Because if Brooklyn and Nicola ever decide to have children, and this feud continues exactly as it is today, those children could potentially grow up without meaningful relationships with an entire side of their family. Nicola's dad is older. Obviously, by the time they have kids, who knows if he'll be around. My point is, they would have one grandmother available and just Nicola's side of the family. Harry and Meghan's children already seem, in my opinion, to be quite isolated. Obviously, we know Meghan doesn't talk to her brother, her sister, her dad, had no contact with William, with Catherine. Charles is very limited. Camilla, Harry said horrible things about her in his book. My point is, apart from Doria Ragland, there seems to be not many other family members there, or any other family members there. And so the only people that really suffer are the children. That's where adult anger becomes incredibly selfish, because you're no longer deciding only who you want in your life. Your decisions can determine which grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins your children grow up knowing. And it actually reminds me of the Brad Pitt and Angelina situation, which I spoke about recently. I'll link the video I made to the end of this one. So you can check that out if you have time. My conclusion there wasn't that Brad was the good guy or Angelina was the good guy. I think both of them are absolute gobshites and they've behaved appallingly at different points, both of them. And I explain why. Neither one of them come out of that relationship looking good. And ultimately, who lives with the consequences of they've had 10 years of bitterness since 2016 to present day, 2026. Who lives with those consequences between the two adults? It's always the children. And that's why I really dislike the casual way we sometimes talk about estrangement, as though cutting people off is automatically empowering. And I said I'd mention this about Oprah. Oprah in the last couple of years did a special in which she spoke about estrangement, and the ease in which she spoke about just cutting people out of life, I found absolutely disgusting. Her judgment is clouded. I think her and Meghan Markle are very, very similar in that they see dollar signs first beyond anything else. That's my opinion. That is my opinion. I cannot accept someone like her would be hosting a conversation about family estrangement. So just before we finish, all I want to say is when we talk about reconciliation, which I think is important for any family, I think it's important for Brooklyn to have reconciliation with his family. And I think with Harry, it's more complicated just because the lies they told were so egregious. Reconciliation could be more difficult. They went on a global platform and it was hit after hit after hit between Netflix show and Oprah and the book. That's more difficult to forgive. But in general, reconciliation does require swallowing your pride and it requires compromise. And sometimes it means being civil to somebody you don't like because that relationship matters deeply to somebody you love. I don't think Meghan could ever get there. That's my opinion. After reading Betrayal and Revenge, I don't think Meghan could ever be nice to Princess Catherine in order for Harry to have a relationship with William. Not that I think William or Catherine want a relationship with either of them, but I'm just giving you an example. And so that brings me right back to the comment that started this video. Nicola is over it. But Brooklyn gave up an enormous amount to stand beside Nicola. Harry gave up everything to stand beside Meghan. So perhaps the question shouldn't be whether Nicola or Meghan are over it. Perhaps the question is, if your husband was willing to sacrifice his family for you, what are you willing to sacrifice to help him get his family back? That is it for today. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Had you watched the podcast with Alison Boshoff? And do you get the feeling that I get that she has been predominantly more pro Brooklyn and pro Harry? Let's open up the conversation below. Thanks for listening. See you in the next one. Bye.